Is going to be on a case for a new history of ancient India. And I do apologize if that sounds pompous, but some of the work that we have done tries to perhaps cast light on areas where it's less than ideal. What has happened in the past and what we study appears to be less than an ideal fit. So because of that, I hope to make a case for that. And in all humbleness, I say it's a case for a new history. So nothing pompous about that. A quick disclaimer, the scholarly work presenting facts, not intended to hurt anybody's opinions. So a quick note on Indian history awareness and research. We are a small think tank based in Houston as well as in Bangalore. And here are some of our members. And right now we've got Sahana Singh who's sitting over here. And we also have Sudhi Subramanian who's also sitting over here, two of our team members, and the rest are based in various locations. So I'd like to set the stage by first presenting where did the problems of Indian history start. If I might position the problem as a problem, it starts with European Indology. I believe European Indology set the stage for erasure, distortions, errors, and widespread devaluation and discrediting of the sources. Not only did they make an attempt to consolidate and try to have a narrative on the history of India, but that was not done without a price, and this is the price that we have paid. A quick note on the ideological scholarship that came about to the British Indology. This is by no means an exhaustive list, it is just a representative of what I thought is important for my talk today. This gentleman over here, William Jones, is a founder of the Asiatic Society, and he discovered some common roots between Sanskrit, Greek, and Latin. He first made a compendium on Hindu law, which did not exist at that time, because he was being called to judge upon cases that came before him when he was at Calcutta. So he made this Hindu law. He was also the first proposer of the so-called Aryan invasion theory. And one of the things that I'd like to highlight his contribution is that he distorted Puranic genealogies. His work was based first on plumbing the available king lists available in the Puranas, and I'll talk a little later on how he distorted some of these things. The next gentleman is John Bentley, who lived approximately around 1825 and so on. That's when his intellectual works are there. A brilliant man who was a mathematician, an astronomer, and so on. But he used his brilliance with a single-minded purpose, and that single-minded purpose was to show that all of Hindu astronomy is a forgery. He wanted to show that they were not as ancient as they claimed to be, and they were all based on much more recent works. In fact, some of the more egregious issues that he did was he put Bhaskaracharya as contemporaneous with Akbar, and he also put Brahmaguptas in the 12th century, both of which were completely incorrect. And he claimed that the earliest of the Indian astronomy cannot be any earlier than 1300 BCE. And we'll see some of the issues coming out of this. We all know here about Max Muller. So Max Muller was greatly influenced by John Bentley. Now, the situation is like this. If a Nobel Prize winner were to write an opinion and a paper on some subject, and you're not an expert in that area, the chances are you'll defer to him. You'll say, that gentleman has said so-and-so, I'm not an expert in that, but I defer to him, and I'll go on with that. Such was the case with Max Muller. When he encountered the Vedas and so on, he very well knew about the evidence for antiquity in the Vedas. But he was also well aware of the ruckus that John Bentley created in his time in Asiatic Review and several other journals of that era. And because of that, he was unwilling to go with any of the earlier claims that were present in the Vedas. He preferred to do linguistic analysis alone. So he preferred to do a linguistic analysis and the periodization of Sanskrit, and he preferred to say that the Sanskrit, the Vedas are taken to the eras that he proposed in it. So let me quickly go. The Chronology Games that played. So William Jones, John Bentley, and other 18th century British Indologists. Now these are not bad guys. I'm not trying to make them as bad guys. These are the products of their times. And these people belong to the Anglican Church, the Church of England. And in that era, people did not separate out the belief systems very well from their professional lives. Today we have some kind of a notion of secularity, but it was absent in the past. So they wove their beliefs on their sleeve and in the work that they did. So this gentleman, they tried to reconcile the Hindu accounts they were reading for the first time along with biblical beliefs. The Anglican Church at that time believed in a creation date of 4004 BCE. based on biblical genealogies. And they also believed in Noah's deluge and repopulation. The bottom line was their position: there cannot have been a history of the world before Noah's flood, because God had destroyed the entire earth, and the repopulation of the population happened after Noah, and therefore there cannot be a history before that. If there had to be a history, it's some distortion. So they took it upon themselves to correct these so-called distortions in Hindu genealogies. So bottom line, William Jones forced a 5,000 year span Purana king list to a shortened chronology of 1800 years. And the only way you can do that is by throwing out several things as mythical or don't exist, or this data is wrong, the date is wrong. He pulled some from later periods, put them in earlier periods, and some from earlier periods and later periods. All kinds of things were done later on the chronology so that they could do that. The next thing is he sheet anchored Chandragupta Maurya to the so-called Sandrakutos who appeared in the Greek accounts. Now there was no basis for doing that other than a phonetically similar sounding name, and so he did that. The point is, in the Puranic account, Chandragupta Maurya is 1800 BCE. How do we take a figure from 1800 BCE and put him down to somewhere around 300 BCE? This is what we are taught today, and we accept it. The sheet anchoring has enabled comparative history between the Greeks and the Indians and so on. But we need to go back and critique the starting points. Why did we do these things? Can they be critiqued? What is the evidence to support some of these things? I hope I can quickly talk about some of those. And Bentley, like I said earlier, proclaimed all of Hindu astronomy as modern forgeries. So there's distortion of sources, ideological leaning, and discrediting and devaluation of sources. So this led to the so-called mainstream narrative which all of us are inheritors of. So there are two components to the mainstream narrative. One component is Eurocentric. So the Eurocentric narrative says that the Western narrative that anything of value should have originated among the white people. It could not have originated anywhere else. The Western usurping of the Greek, Asia Minor, and Egypt as part of the Eurocentric heritage, although the Egyptians are not white people, but they assert as part of the Western tradition. A willful distortion and ignoring of evidence that negates Eurocentric superiority, and the self-deluding rationalization of the so-called white man's world. So these are the kind of ideologies that play into what we have inherited today. Hand in hand, our Indian historians have inherited this kind of a narrative, and this is what we have, the mainstream narrative, which unfortunately has morphed into a Hindu-phobic narrative. One where there's bigotry and hatred against Hinduism and Hindus. I'm sorry to be saying those things in such blunt terms, but this is staring at you anytime you look at the media or anywhere else where people are ashamed to connect to their past and who they are as a people. So in this narrative, the Indus Valley is the earliest Indian civilization. Horse chariot-bound Aryan invaders drove the tribal Harappans to the south and invented the subjugating Vedic Brahmanism, destroyed civilization, and they created Sanskrit, caste system, sati, and so on. Buddha came along and revised the social order, and civilization returned. Okay? Civilization returned after this Indus Valley, after Bhagava's contact with Greeks. The Greeks brought science, math, astronomy to Indians. The Brahmins destroyed Buddhism and upheld caste system and sati. The Muslim invasion of India gave Indians culture, arts, and architecture. The European invasion of India gave Indians science, culture, progress, civilization, modernity, removed the primitive practices of Hinduism. As a corollary, today we are told that Hinduism is primitive, backward, anachronistic, and should be jettisoned for progress. And these are the values that most of us wear on our sleeves, subconsciously or consciously. We are mind colonized one way or the other, and we have internalized these values. I hope to challenge some of these things. My talk is going to be organized in these four questions. I'll address these four questions. Is the Aryan invasion migration theory valid? How ancient is the Indian civilization? What did the ancient Indians know? And did knowledge flow out of India? These four questions. So the first, is the Aryan invasion or migration theory valid? In order to address this, there's a whole host of new research coming out, perhaps since the 1990s, 95, and so on, when genetics has come about trying to describe who are we as a people. And the methods they use is the maternal mitochondrial DNA. Using this and sequencing of that, they're able to try and group along the appropriate haplogroups. Haplogroups are genetic traits that people might have. Using clustering analysis of mathematical clustering analysis, they're able to cluster it and try to see in a population where are the genetic markers. So these genetic markers are things that we inherit because of mutations in our ancestors. Some ancestor might have a mutation and pass it on to future progeny. And because of that, there's ways to track how did they go along in a people. So Journey of Mankind, Stephen Oppenheimer, 2003. The story starts out of Africa, somewhere around 140,000 years ago, and this is the modern man. The modern man is a Homo sapien, the same cranial capacity as you and me, and so we might be able to even have a conversation if we had the same language capability and so on, same ability for abstract thought and so on. So this modern man came out of Africa, and there was a crossing over here at somewhere around Oman or so, and they estimate that perhaps about 200 families are the only ones that made it out of Africa crossing. And the important thing is, all the non-African people of the world are descended from this group of people who came from here. So these people hug the coast, as you can see, through the Sindh area into Gujarat, the triangular part of India, onto the eastern part of India, to Sumatra, Thailand, and so on, up to Thailand. So this is approximately 85,000 years to 75,000 years ago. There are a couple of things that you might want to ask. What is the migration model, and why did they not head westwards? Why did they go eastwards? First thing about the migration model. The migration model was not one of, hey, let's go out to Australia. It never was one like that. So this is one where nearest social model is the Bushman. In the Bushman society, they don't have possessions. They have nothing to tie them down to the land saying, I own this land, I have this house, I have a TV, and all those kinds of things. Nothing. They just had a husband, wife, perhaps a child, and maybe a bow and arrow and a spear. And if food was not available, or they did not like that noisy neighbor, all they would do is they'll just take a whole family and go 1 kilometer down the road and start a new life. This is the nomadic way of living. And so this migration that you see is a generation by generation movement. It is not something where they said, let's get out of that place. It never was there. Why did they not head westwards? There existed one more species of humans called Neanderthals. In those days, the human being was a lot more puny. Today we are, after generations and generations of good nutrition, we are about 6 feet tall and maybe about 70 to 80 kilograms. But in those days, the human being was a lot more puny. And the Neanderthal was a much more ferocious human in comparison. The range of the Neanderthals was up to Iran. This is Iran, somewhere over here, the Chagai Hills, and that formed a boundary. So the Neanderthals lived there, and the Homo sapien had to hide away from them and try to find sanctuary. One thing I like to point out is, out of Africa, the first place where the human being would have found refuge and equilibrium would have been the Punjab area. The Punjab area would have offered a sanctuary for food, availability of water, good weather, and all of those kinds of things. A chance for people to set root over here. About 75,000 years ago, there was a super volcano. The super volcano is called Mount Toba. It was in Sumatra. This super volcano led to volcanic ash of up to 5 meters deep in India and Pakistan. 5 meters deep, 75,000 years ago. This picture here is from Jwalapuram in Andhra Pradesh, where even today, after this excavation, they are finding the ash layer. And beneath the ash layer, they're finding artifacts of the early human who lived over there. So the bottom line over here is that the genetic pool was repopulated from individuals from this side as well as this side. There was a 6-year nuclear winter and an instant 1,000-year mini ice age. As you can see, there's ice all over this place, and the migration has stopped. Less than 1,000 breeding human beings are estimated to have repopulated the world at that point. So 65,000 years ago, something happened, and that something is the ice ages ended. Once the ice ages ended, it also coincided with the dying of the Neanderthals. When the Neanderthals died, a group of individuals from the Punjab area of India migrated and became the future Europeans. So the Europeans are descended from this group of people who went from here, whereas the migrations here have reached up to Australia, as you can see. So 40,000 years ago, the migrations are still going deeper into Europe, whereas from here, one branch from Punjab, one from Mesopotamia, one from eastern India, these people joined together and crossed the land straight into North America, became the future Americans. So the Americans really, the Red Indians were really Indians, if you think about it. So there's an irony of this whole thing. So that is my story for who we are as a people. So clearly we are out of Africa, and the genetic pool of the world was really from the Indian stock. I'd like to fast forward now to 12,000 years so that we can have a story about the Aryan invasion theory. This is what we started about. A couple of terminology, ANI and ASI. ANI is ancestral North Indian, ASI is ancestral South Indian. This paper from Genetics 2013 talks, this Priya Moorjani and others, they talk about who are we as a people. And they say that the ANI and ASI diverged from a common ancestor about 60,000 years ago. Remember, I said about entering into India. So the North Indian population and the South Indian population had a common ancestor 60,000 years ago. They existed side by side without mixing for an exceedingly long period of time until something happened about 4,000 years ago. So about 4,000 years ago, they mixed. There was a lot of mixing, not just little mixing, a lot of mixing in the population, intermarrying and so on, which somehow stopped about 2,000 years ago. And up to the present day populations, they are endogamous, marrying within communities and so on. But this time, there was a lot of mixing of people. How does it affect our story? The same researchers say it's important to emphasize that although we have documented evidence for mixture, this does not imply migration from West Eurasia into India at this time. Because the question is there evidence of Central Asian genes in the North Indian population? And these people have come emphatically saying no, it is not. On the contrary, a recent study to search for West Eurasian groups most closely related to the ANI ancestors failed to find any evidence of shared ancestry within the past 12,500 years ago. So if you had to find evidence for common ancestry between Central Asian pool and the North Indian pool, you had to go back not to 1750 BCE, but you had to go back somewhere maybe 10,000 BCE, an exceedingly long period of time. One more paper, this is I believe in 2012, and the famous Professor Ramaswamy Pichappan. Genetic differentiation began 6,000 years ago. So this professor studied 1,680 individuals from Tamil Nadu, from different castes and tribes. And he tried to see, in Tamil Nadu at least, what is the story. And he found that the genetic differentiation is 6,000 years old. In Tamil Nadu, people were endogamous 6,000 years ago, meaning that it creates the so-called Aryan invasion theory by 2,000 years. So we have some evidence from the north and some evidence from the south that there is no case of mixing because of some invasions or any such thing. There is also some evidence of outward migration. There's a paper in 2013 from PLOS, and what these people did, none of them are Indians in this paper. So what they did is they found some skeletons around 2,500 BCE in the area of Syria. And when they tried to see genetically who were these people who were in the Roman period, they found that the genetic remains had genetic affinity to the Indian subcontinent. So they found that the people had affinity to the Indian subcontinent. And this is a critical part of the story when we tie up the accounts of Professor Subhash Khan, who talked about the outward migration of people after the Saraswati River dried around approximately 1800 BCE. And cause populations to move outward. So this genetic study is an affirmation of Professor Subhash Khan's works and says that yes, it is possible that it happened. This is from a paper in Nature, and this is from 2014. And this paper says a 200-year drought cycle doomed the Indus Valley civilization. There was no invasion, there was no people's horse-bound chariot and all this kind of people coming and killing people and chasing them to the south or any such thing. Apparently, a 200-year drought event doomed this. I'd like to point out that in history, you have an 8.2 kilo-year event, which is a 300-year dry event, a 5.9 kilo-year event of intense drought, a 4.2 kilo-year event, 100 years severe drought. This caused the collapse of Mesopotamia and the migration of the Indus Valley. And there was a drying up of Saraswati about 4,000 years ago. And Subhash Khan shows how the migration happened because of that. So when we want to study prehistory, a period of time when there's no writing or epigraphy or things of that nature, we need to use methods of science and go into the geology, into ice ages and so on, and try to construct a narrative from there. Here is some evidence of settlements in India from about 40,000 years ago. What we see is we have this so-called early Stone Age, late Stone Age, middle Stone Age. I don't like this word Stone Age because Stone Age romantically conjures up an image of a wild man beating a woman with a club and dragging her by the hair and so on, as if he is a illiterate person and so on. But my position is that these people were intellectually capable of abstract thought and so on. So we should not really use these words, but unfortunately I got this from a secular source, and so we have to live with this. So what you see is that there are settlements all over the south. For example, over here you see a dark circle, here is a dark circle, and so on. This correlates well with ancient man first came to the triangular part of India. Then he progressively moved upwards through the jungles of India as technology got better. That's where you see the middle circles. You see these circles, the Narmada Valley and so on, going upwards to the north. And you see that's in a later time. And you have a whole lot of things happening, for example, the Soan Valley, the Beas Valley, and so on. Ancient artifacts. All over India, we have got a lot of artifacts that talk to us about the antiquity of this land. In Bhimbetka, in Madhya Pradesh, 35,000 years ago, we have got rock art. And in Bhimbetka, there's also an image of a horse with a rider. Not just a horse, but a horse with a rider. Those of you who remember the famous battle between Professor Witzel of Harvard and Professor Rajaram, will recollect that Rajaram was derided because they said there's no evidence of horse in ancient India till the Aryans brought them in. But here you don't have just a horse, but you also have a rider and a horse. Because I think they domesticated more than 35,000 years ago. Here, Edakal caves in Kerala, 9,000 years ago, this appears to be evidence of writing and some connection with Harappa also. That's currently under research. Birana and Rakhigarh in Haryana are in the news in recent days, and it's more than 10,000 years old. And Ketavaram, Andhra Pradesh, 8,000 years ago, and Ramachakapuram, Telangana, 12,000 years ago. Now, if any of us were to take a cursory look at the map of India and tie it up with the knowledge of our sacred geography, which I mean from our itihasas and so on, you find that there are several places named the epics that are deeply tied to the geography of the land. Whether you take the Ramayana or Mahabharata, it is spread all over. Kishkinda, Ayodhya, Kaushala, you name it. All over the place you have this. So the epics are ignored as sources of history. That is a given. Remember the biases I talked about earlier. It doesn't exist. As a contrast, I'd like to put this for here for a couple of minutes for you to introspect in what we have thought. This is the mainstream narrative. In the mainstream narrative, you have the Indus Valley civilization, commenced 5,000 years ago, declined 3,600 years ago, and empty lands over here. This is what you thought. You can open your child's textbooks, NCERT textbooks, and see this is what you thought. But then there is evidence for a lot more happening in India. There's a lot more. The erased history of India. That's what we're talking about. Aryan invasion theory failed. Genetic evidence of great antiquity of Indian people. The non-African people are descended from Indian stock. There is no evidence of genes from Central Asia anywhere from 12,500 years ago. Evidence of differentiation more than 6,000 years ago in Tamil Nadu. No invasion. Climate change caused collapse of Indus Valley. Ancient artifacts predate the so-called